And it is really an honor to be here. Thank you very much for asking me. But I was Rose Queen in 1949. She thinks it's, what, 60? 58 is old. This is really old. But when I was Rose Queen, I was elected by my classmates. It was a very simple thing, and I was honored to be the Thomasville Rose Queen, the second one. Doris Gothard was the first one. And it was so much smaller, but still for Thomasville, at that time it was a large event. And we did have a parade, and I was on a float, and the float was a wagon with the great big wheels and moss hanging everywhere. And some of the girls had to sit on the moss and had these great big skirts. And I think we had a little trouble with this. But they sprayed us down pretty good. But we did have such a good time. And the Rose Show, I think it was out at Finney General Hospital.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
And in Thomasville at that time on Gordon Avenue, down near Lover's Lane, there was a hotel, and it was called Piney Woods Hotel.
Three times. That was three times in.
3 times in, that's right. And that's where we had our formal dance. And I had a date with Ed Kelly. And we were introduced, and we were the grand marshals of this dance. It was, and we had Guy Lombardo.
Oh my gosh.
So, and had a perfectly wonderful time. And being from a small town like Thomasville was just such a wonderful way to grow up. And I get kind of teary-eyed when I think about it, because it was such a wonderful time of my life. And it's so nice of you to ask me to come.
It's nice of you to come.
And I don't know exactly if this is what you wanted me to do.
Absolutely, it's absolutely.
Right.
I have one
Thank you
question.
so much.
I have one question. Having been involved in the pageant for so many years, and being a part of the Miss America pageant, we have to have a panel of judges, etc. You said that you were selected by your peers in high school.
That's right.
Would you elaborate on that for the audience?
Well, it was not until some years after I was queen. I don't really know how many years. I was trying to remember who was the first one who had to do the Miss America thing. I would have never. I mean, that would be something I would have never been able to go through. You had to go through it, didn't you? And I just admire you so. But you know, to be a part, ours was a strictly local thing.
Right, and how did they vote for you?
It was
was it the junior? I've always heard that it was one of the classes,
Senior class.
the senior class that voted for the Rose Queen. Is that the way it was?
That's it.
Yeah.
It was just that simple. And so I felt very honored, because it wasn't a beauty contest. It was because they liked me a little bit. So, but you know, it was one of those things that when they told me that I had been selected, I think I broke down and cried. But
how long before the parade were you selected?
You know, Tom, I don't remember.
I think it probably was around a week or so, but
It was
yeah.
not long. It was a surprise. However, we did have time to make my dress.
Ah.
And there was a wonderful dressmaker who lived out, I can't remember, it was kind of toward Pelham maybe. And it was made in layers. And I had lace on each one of those layers. And it was a white, it was totally white. And I felt like Scarlett O'Hara. Except that I was the wrong color. She had wonderful brunette. She was a wonderful brunette.
I was going to say, I want to entertain questions from the audience, and I also want to ask Mr. Hjort to chime in about roses and flowers. And I'm curious, not being a Thomasvillian, what makes a winning rose and all those things, without getting into probably too much detail, but if I think Mr. Hjort might be the right person to attack that question. And I don't know if the microphone would reach up there, so if that's possible, I don't know if you can, is that something that you could chime in on, or?
I don't quite understand.
Well, I was talking about rose.
He can't hear.
Bring him up here.
Want to put a chair up there?
He can. We can put him a chair over here.
Just watch that cord there.
Okay.
They can't see
Maybe,
him behind
maybe,
the podium.
yeah.
Tom,
Maybe
we're gonna get
you want
a little bit closer.
You want to stand at the podium and hold on?
I can hold on.
Frank, you hold the mic.
Just watch that cord.
Oh, you know, let me-
I got it. You have a
All
seat.
right, I'll sit here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice to sit next to the king of all.
No. This is Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it so much. I'm glad to be here with all you folks. And if it's awesome questions, I'll try to answer. But quite frankly, I've been out of the rose business for several years, but I'll do the best I can.
You still grow them at home? You still have some at your house?
Oh, yes, I still
So you
grow.
still
I
grow?
grow a few roses.
What makes a winning rose?
Well, I guess votes.
Yeah, votes. But what do they vote on?
That was good.
What we were doing years ago, I remember we were one of about 12 or 15 different businesses who grew roses commercially. And we were asked to exhibit them at shows and so forth. And we would vote on what we considered some of the best roses. So really, there were a lot of good roses came by, but if there was something unusually good, we would always like to pick it out. I'm thinking about roses like the Peace Rose. It was very, very well known. The red one, Mr. Lincoln, was an exceptionally fine rose. Roses like that, and they were spread around, and they would. A lot of those roses were grown by people here and elsewhere. So roses were real famous, and we grew a lot of them here in Thomasville. Different people did.
And I know, Amelia, did you have a question?
I was going to ask Miss Jane whether or not she still had her dress, because we have Miss Doris's dress over in the corner, and I'm just curious because several Rose Queens have said they kept it or lost track of it, and I was just curious if you happen to have yours still.
I'm not sure exactly.
Do you still have your dress that
Do you have your dress, the one that you described?
I have no idea where it is, and it just breaks my heart because my mother worked so hard on it.
We've heard that from several
But it sure was pretty.
Celia,
And incidentally, Ephraim got the Times Enterprise for that second Rose Festival that featured you, and the pictures in the original Times Enterprise is over here on the desk with your picture in that dress.
Oh my goodness.
So we'll have time afterwards for everybody to take a look at that and have refreshments.
And I understand there's another Rose Queen here Mary Jo?
Mary
Oh,
Jo.
there she is. I couldn't see her there. Stand up, stand up. Mary Jo was a wonderful trooper and did so very well for us at the Miss Georgia pageant and all during her tenure as the Rose Queen. We should hear from you as well sometime.
Oh, thank you, but I was not the Georgia Rose Queen, so that was after 1965.
Well, you were, but you probably one of the ones that they decided to name Georgia Rose Queen for the future one because of all the job that you did. You traveled though throughout the country, did you not? As Rose Queen, didn't you make a couple of? Well, maybe it was after.
No, that was after my time.
Okay, all right. I thought you did.
I was curious from the Rose Queens what your talents. You had to do the talent competition that always entertains me. What was your talent? Do you remember? Celia doesn't. You remember?
Well, I didn't have to have a talent.
Oh.
See that? Well, that's the reason mine was so simple.
Remember, Miss Porter taught us all to dance, and so Miss Porter taught me how to do something.
I took dance lessons from her.
But Nell White wrote a skit for me. Nell was married to my cousin Robert, and they lived in Atlanta. And Nell wrote a skit, and Miss Porter taught me how to do whatever I was supposed to do, and I did. And, and we have a picture. I gave Ephraim a picture of that the other day. It's looks like a clown suit. It was fun. The biggest thing I remember about the whole thing was riding down the street to be crowned, and we staged it down at the farmer's market. And I remember being in the back of that convertible with the state patrolman driving his car. And he started going down to Neil's where the crowning was. And he's just poking along. I mean, he's just, and finally I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, don't you think you could go a little faster? Let's do something. And he just tore down the street, turned the siren on. And that's what I remember the most. That and Ben Grace was the one to get me out of the car to take me up to be crowned. And years later, I came across the slide of Ben. And Ben was, well, I don't know how old Ben was, but I said to him one day, I've got this picture of you taking me to be crowned when I was the Rose Queen. And he drew himself up and looked at me and he said, Celia, I wasn't even in Thomasville when you were the Rose Queen. I certainly was not. I said, well, I've got this picture, and I left it at that, but when I find it next time, I'm going to get somebody to take a picture, and we can prove to somebody that he was here then. He did not want to be that old. I thought that was funny.
I was also curious about, and I don't mean to interrupt folks from the audience have questions, but for maybe Ruth and Tom, what is the most challenging part about it? I mean, there's so much. There's a pageant, there's a parade, there's a rose show, there's the queen. It's like, what is the most, there's going to be a lot of logistics to take care of. Wow. The Rosebud Queen, the Rosebud
Well, there was
parade?
no Rosebud parade at the time.
Right.
And I think the most challenging thing that we found about the Rose Parade itself is keeping it moving.
Yeah.
See, that Celia was trying to help
Keeping
with
it moving. we had at times, and we had people that were out there, the committees had people that were out there at certain junctures to move them along or to hold them up because the parade just, there was no way to really keep it moving with equal amounts of space in between the bands or the parade or the floats or the entries or things of that nature. That was I think, as far as the parade was concerned. The community, when I was involved, we had many, many different people in the community, and many of them came back every year and were part of it, no matter who the chairman was. And we had a great group of Thomasvillians that turned out and worked hard all year long on the parade. That we drew on that talent, we drew on that enthusiasm, we drew on what makes Thomasville special, and that's the willingness of the people to come to the forefront and do what's necessary. And that's, I think, the secret of the longevity of the Rose Parade.
Speaking of that, we had there, I don't know if there's still a radio club here in Thomasville, but there was a radio club, and they were the ones that kept the parade lined up and moving. And they had their, what are those little two-way radios, you know, so that they were stationed all up and down the parade route. So when there was a problem, they would call, and usually I was around the reviewing stand, and I'd have to try to keep them going because the TV was there. So a lot of them slowed down so they could be on TV. So they would slow down, and all of a sudden there's a gap on Broad Street, which we didn't want. But we'd call down there, and they would run out there and try to keep them moving. So it was good to have people stationed all up and down the parade route with their radios. See, they didn't have cell phones back then. And so we keep them moving, and that was really a great thing because those people were such dedicated to the parade. They just felt like it was their parade, and a lot of it, the success of it, was due to them. But being on television, we had to keep them moving because we had a limited time, and the Rose Queen was the last float. So we had to get the Rose Queen on television, so we had to keep them moving so that one could get there on television too. So it was quite a challenge,
Tricky, I'm sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience?
I have two questions. First question, how many Thomasville Rose Queens have made it to win Miss Georgia?
Well, we've had 4 Thomasville Rose Queens to win Miss Georgia. We had one other Thomasville young woman who was first runner-up to the Rose Queen, and she went on later to win Miss Georgia. But we've had 5 total Thomasville women to be Miss Georgia, and we've had a number of them to be first runner-up. Mary Jo was second runner-up, I believe. And we've had a number of top tenors, talent winners, swimsuit winners. Thomasville, for a long time, was a big contender for the title, along with Miss Cobb County. We always had a real rivalry between Cobb County and Thomasville for a good long time.
Second question. Used to be, now tell me if I'm wrong, we used to have, Thomasville had more rose bushes on public land than like anybody else. Is that accurate? Is that still true?
It's true to the extent that we have many Thomasville legends that we don't try to prove or disprove. So we just like to say yes. We've heard that.
I remember they used to say there were more rose bushes in Thomasville than residents.
And that's probably true too at that point in time.
And that's when Wayman Ziegel was the groundskeeper or whatever for the city. He knew how to grow roses, and he had them at every space he could put them. So they were all over Thomasville, and there probably were more roses than people at one time, because a lot of individuals even grew roses. I even tried it one time, but it's not easy, Paul.
You had the wrong variety.
I guess so.
So to follow that up, what's an easy variety of rose to grow?
Well, there's certain varieties. It's kind of hard to figure that out, but I'm thinking probably the Queen Elizabeth rose was one of the very best, a beautiful pink rose, not as large as some of the others, but very prolific grower and kept well as a cut flower. Still roses like that, a lot of different things would make it a good rose. But we had any number of good roses, but I remember that one particularly. Our favorite red rose, I think, was one named Mr. Lincoln. And you may probably remember that one too, but there's several others. But the Queen Elizabeth for a pink and Mr. Lincoln for a red one was the 2 favorite roses in Thomasville that I remember back when I was growing roses.
Thank you.
Well, I think one way that Thomasville became so well known outside of the area as the Rose City is due largely to Hjort's nursery, because I think everybody who ever came to Rose Show left with a rose bush from Paul's. Can you talk a little bit about what a test garden is and what you all did there for the rose industry, I guess?
Well, our rose garden was there on Old Smith Avenue, most of you probably remember it. And we had about 10 acres right in that particular area. And we had something like, well, we would get additional roses every year, and we would discard others. If we would run the test garden, we had to discard those that we didn't like, and we would put new ones in. But we kept growing. Actually, we had about close to 1,000 bushes in our garden at one time there. But we always like to pick out the best ones, and we try to keep those, and the others would, I don't know what would happen to them.
One of the things that I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just going to talk about the test gardens, because they're all over the country. And the people are testing these roses. That's why they have to grade them. They're testing them to see if they will do what area they will grow best in, and what the best roses to grow. And see, Paul and Mr. Hjort and all, they would pull out those that weren't really performing good, and then the ones that were, then they graded them and sent it to what is the place that does that? The test gardens, Paul. There's some place you send it to them.
Well, we belong to a group we call All America Rose Selections, AARS. You see that letter anywhere? That's what it was. It was a rose garden, and we would water 15 or 20 scattered all around the country.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was so rigorous.
We're the only ones in the South.
Yeah, and one of them is in Richmond, Indiana, that we had our sister Rose Festival with, and we got to visit that rose garden too. And they always wanted to come to the rose garden here when they came down, because they were so interested in it. And some of the people that were involved in the Rose Festival up there would always make a point of trying to be a chaperone to come down here so that they could come down and see ours too. But the rose test gardens were very vital to the growing of roses for everybody, because there were different places in the country so that they could test those particular climates to see what to do. Now, Richmond had more roses grown under glass up there. They had hothouses they grew theirs in, because that was very cold. It's just a little right out of Indianapolis, Indiana, if you know where that is, and that's getting cold up there. So they grew a lot of theirs that way. But they do test them so that they can grow them in those particular areas.
One of the things that I wanted to say about the parade is many of you know that it began in 1948. And at one point in time, I think maybe from the beginning, I don't know this for a fact. This is one of those I've been told. We had Miss America to come down, I think, from the very beginning. Yep. And every year, for a long time, Miss America came to Thomasville, and she crowned our Rose Queen. She was in the parade. She was in a number of things. I have two interesting personal stories about Miss America that I remember. When I think it was 10 years old, I was standing on the parade route, and the only Miss America, Neva Jane Langley from Georgia, was in the parade, and she was riding on her classic Nash Rambler, since Nash was a sponsor of the Miss America pageant at the time. And as the parade was going along, she just happened to stop right in front of where I was standing, and a gust of wind came, and if you all remember, they had those net stoles on those gowns, and she was holding on that net stole, and the wind just blew it right out of her arm, and it was coming down on the street, and I just went running out there and got the stole and brought it up to her, and she leaned over and kissed me, and I was so excited about the whole thing. Many years ago.
What chivalry.
Yes, absolutely. Many years ago, I happened to be with Neva Jane at another location, and I reiterated the story to her, and she said that she remembered it, and she told me about the color of the gown and the whole thing. And we had Neva Jane to come to Thomasville. I can't remember when it was, but anyway, she came with the pageant, and we rode down Broad Street so she could kind of see what was going on. That was my first introduction to pageants, and maybe that's the reason that I became so involved in it. The second thing is that Sharon K. Ritchie was here, and she was supposed to go to, she was here, I think, emceeing and making emceeing the pageant on Thursday night when it was held Thursday night, and then the girl was crowned on Friday. And she was leaving Friday afternoon from Tallahassee, and so I took her down to Tallahassee only to find out that her plane had been canceled. Now, there were no hotel rooms at all available in Thomasville when I got back. And so I didn't know what else to do, and I called my mom and dad, and I said, I don't have any place else for her to stay. Can she maybe stay with you all tonight? And of course, Dad was very excited about that. And they immediately moved out of their bedroom and moved upstairs. And when we got there, their bedroom was prepared for Sharon K. Ritchie, and she spent the night, and I took her down the next day. Well, my dad had a great joy in going to Rotary the next week and saying, guess who slept in my bed?
Oh, I didn't know we were going to get scandalous stories about her.
Well, during the Rose Festivals, when the Miss Americas were here, we had a dance, a Rose Festival dance. And that was one of Ed Kelly's favorite things, was to be the escort for Miss America at the dance and dance with them. He always had the first dance. So Ed loved doing that, because he loved all the queens, Jane.
Any more questions?
All right, this is family legend, I guess. My grandmother, Una Middleton, was, I guess, president of the Garden Club at some point. My parents, my dad, my Uncle Lane, my Aunt Sybil said in 1948, the city council decided to do away with the Rose Show. It was not economically viable, and they voted against that. And that my grandmother and several others got up in front of them and lobbied and said it's great for the community and say, and not her saving it. Have any of y'all ever heard that the city council had said they're not going to do it anymore? And
Never heard it, and
before
probably the members of the city council who did that went into hiding with that because they knew how unpopular it had become.
Okay.
Yeah. But thankfully for your grandmother and the other members of the Garden Club, you bring up a very good point there, Ben. The Garden Club ladies over the years really stepped up for the Rose Show itself, and for many years they were the real effort behind the success of the Rose Show. And then there came the Rose Society, or the Rose, what do you call the Rose group? I can't remember.
Thomasville Rosarians?
Yeah, well, it's the Rose Society. Yeah, it's the Rose Society. They pretty well assumed the responsibility for the Rose Show. There's still a flower show that is taking place every year at the Garden Center, and those ladies, the garden clubs, are the ones who run that, and then the Rose Society runs the Rose Show itself. So we have two groups that have their dedication to flowers, so to speak.
But I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary Jo.
Bobby Crawford just left, and this is changing the subject back to the right. Bobby Crawford just left, and he said that he would like for me to say to you that it has never rained.
Yes, right.
Now, I can remember, because I've been coming since, in the early 50s. There were times that there was this stuff coming from the sky.
It's not raining.
On any other day, it would have been rain. But was never on.
Well, I'll tell you what had happened a lot of times, Mary Jo, is the rain would come in the morning, and I know 2 or 3 times when I was very active with the parade, that the rain would come in the morning, and when parade time started,
It stopped.
the clouds went by the way, and the sun came, and almost as soon as the parade was over, it would start again. Now that's not, I've been told, I saw it for a fact. So I think it's pretty reliable to say that it doesn't rain on the Rose Parade.
Celia's got a different memory.
Well, I was just thinking about Roadshow Day and what usually makes the headlines of the paper today. And the Atlanta Constitution, the year I was queen, sent Celestine Sibley down here 2 or 3 days beforehand with a photographer. My mother was so excited. She loved Celestine Sibley. She read her every day, and here this woman was coming to our house. And the pictures were on the front page of the paper, maybe more than once. I mean, you know, after the contest and then on Roadshow Day. And I think that's interesting that it was so important to the state that they sent a top.
The Southern magazine for maybe about 15 years in a row at least would always do their Sunday colored cover.
Well, and then there was a little something that we found in a scrapbook the other day, that when you got your electric bill, there was a little newspaper thing folded up in there, and there was a picture of Thomasville's Rose Queen. I mean, it was a deal for the state. That was part of it.
Well, it still gets a lot of media coverage. I mean.
Well, and Ruth wasn't the Rose Queen, but I've seen a picture from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution of Ruth, Martin, Willett holding a bunch of roses promoting the Rose Show before. I've seen that.
Well, see, that was before these girls were even born.
I'm sorry.
That was in 46, and that was what the Atlanta Journal-Constitution were down here. And they said they picked me for their Rose Queen because somebody said, "Is she the queen?" And she said, "Well, she's our Rose Queen." Aww. So that was the one that they had they had a magazine section in the newspaper. And then about 4 years later, they chose me again to be on the front page of that paper with one of Mr. Kirsch Cocroft's peace roses. So it was, they really believed in covering the Rose Festival.
Alice?
I wondered, when did the parade stop being held in the morning and started being held in the evening, and why?
I don't know that for a fact.
This came up last year, and I want to say that it was like we're talking pretty recently, maybe 2000, 1999, just one of those years.
Well, the television was one reason, because they had 2 hours for the parade in the morning. But also the schools were a problem because the children, see, we've had as many as 30 bands in the parade. And they would be packed ready to go to the beach right after the parade. And they love coming down here. We had them from far away as Athens, Georgia, coming. Because this was their beach weekend. And they would come for the parade in the morning, leave right after that and go to the beach. Well, of course, that's a whole band out of school that day. Now, like the Thomasville and Thomas County schools, that was a holiday. So everybody was out of school here, but out of town, the bands were always down here, and we had, like I said, as many as 30-something bands at times. So that's what we have heard that too, that the schools started calling that unexcused absences sometimes when it was just a parade they were coming to. And when they went to the music festival, see, that was different. That was school. But parades were different, and they just wouldn't excuse them for that. So that is another reason I've heard too, Dom. Mm-hmm.
Parade, I'm sure the mentality around parade, I remember parades back in my hometown growing up, and yes, they were always during the day, and it was 4th of July or something. So I suppose that's changed nationally. You
know, with social media, with all alternative for young people, with alternatives for trips for families and this sort of thing. I think over the country, parades, with the exception of the Rose Parade in California, parades have diminished in importance, and many of them have ceased to exist. Thankfully, ours still does.
Well, we have a 100th anniversary coming up in what, 8 years, 9 years? So maybe
No.
3 years.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, the Rose Show.
Right.
Yeah, we do have the Rose Parade. Started in 48.
Maybe we can get that going and have it during the daytime, but the schools might not like that idea. Go ahead. Janice, you have a question?
Do either of you want to comment on the fact that we had a professional float builder in the area, like Jack Tyson?
Jack Tyson from Cairo, for many years, built those spectacular floats that you'll see in the in the video, and many of the commercial entities had a contract with him every year to build them, and those were fabulous floats.
Yeah, no small feat, I'm sure.
Yeah, not at all. And he would set up at the farmers market, and you could go out and observe them being built. So that was an added attraction to the parade. As prior to the parade, you could go watch him build those floats, and they were really exceptional. We did one float. I remember one time with a gown of real roses that was on a parade. Was on a float.
Then they saved the float, and she appeared in several other parades. We always try to do it in springtime Tallahassee, I know.
But the JCs did that with the help of Jack Tyson.
But they took the float around.
Yeah.
Well, it's clear to me that the Rose, is it called, you say the Rose Show, Rose Festival. And when I first moved here, I had to go back out of town that weekend. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're new here, you're going to miss the Rose Show. So I'm here now, and I'm going to see it, I'm going to go to the parade and everything tonight. But it's obviously this is a huge badge of, honor and everything for this
The
community.
festival started after World War II, World War II, like in 48 when the parade started. Then they started adding more things.
But obviously all the components of it, because the pageant now is in June?
It's in June because, unfortunately, the JCs disbanded. And we had one individual that decided he wanted to take the franchise, and he wanted to do a wider scope for tapping contestants, and the local community was not particularly in favor of having Miss Thomasville from Atlanta or Columbus or any place else, and so the interest diminished, and it eventually ceased to exist. And the Chamber of Commerce, the city's tourism department decided to take it and make it just the Rose Queen pageant with no affiliation to the Miss Georgia pageant, which is a real shame since Thomasville was one of 3 to begin the Miss Georgia pageant. Atlanta, Albany, and Thomasville were the first 3, and they don't know which was actually the very first to sign the contract. We signed ours, or it was signed. Ed Kelly, again, was part of that group that got the franchise for Thomasville for the Miss Georgia pageant.
Well, this is, it's always interesting to me to sort of listen to you guys, and yes, it seems like half of everything I hear in Thomasville is some sort of legend that I'm always talking about.
That's right.
Go with it or don't go with it, but I do
go with it and just say, I've heard.
No, I heard. It's been said, people have told me, etc. So I want to check with the panelists, Mr. Hjort and everybody, make sure, is there anything, I know there's been lots of celebrities that have come over the years, and I'm sure there's been quirky, weird things that have happened too, but without maybe pointing out anything too tragic. You guys remember any instances where, I don't know, a rogue float got out of control or anything like that? Or no, everything's been peaceful and happy? Well,
until Smiley Burnett and Minnie Pearl came. And I think Smiley Burnett, I've heard, it's been said, he was out at, they were doing something at the tobacco warehouse, and he was out there, and I think he imbibed a little bit more than he should have, and he put on quite a show.
There's a picture of him with me.
Oh.
Maybe that's what caused him to imbibe. He got too excited.
He was a character. Just look, well, I remember having seen him on, in the movies, the Saturday movies. Gene Autry or Roy Rogers, one of them. Yeah. And you've got this picture on the screen, and when he walked in, he looked just like that. That hat was just awful. Well, Ephraim's got the picture. It's just, he was out there at the fairgrounds, and I put my arms around him, and we had a picture taken. So,
well, thank you for doing that. No, but it has been, it's been a wonderful idea. Actually, this was Amelia's idea. Oh, Nancy got a question?
Not a question.
Oh.
I just, this event, sorry I'm late, I had another appointment early, but I've asked myself why I love Rose Show. I didn't grow up here. I have this wild shirt because of Rose Show. I probably would have already had some roses over there. So I asked myself, why do I like Rose Show? I associate Rose Show with romance. And in my case, I had met my now husband in January, and we had fallen in love. And by April, he thought I ought to come to Thomasville and meet his parents. And so we did. It started with a very interesting introduction. We got to Coolidge, and Coolidge was, this is not funny, it was not very well developed. He announced to me that this was Thomasville. Since he was pretty much known for some humor, I decided maybe that wasn't true. Anyway, apparently his mama he had his mama get tickets to everything that went on. We got here, we went to the Rose Queen contest on Thursday night. Apparently she assumed the duties on Friday. There was a dance on Friday night. We didn't miss going to the flower show. We didn't miss anything. So maybe that's why I like Thomasville so much. The other romance that went along with it was one year, I can't remember which one, the beauty queen, there always was a beauty queen who came from afar to help with the beauty pageant, it seemed like. The one that came this year was not a Miss Georgia, but she was Miss Dixie. And there never was a cute young woman who came. She was not tall, but she was 5'2", eyes of blue, the prettiest blonde you ever saw. And I was fascinated with the fact that when she walked across the stage, instead of those ugly dyed-to-match things we all had that didn't fit, she pressed across the stage in clear plastic shoes, high heels, probably a 4-inch clear plastic heel cover, and I couldn't take my eyes off those slender shoes on those teeny little feet. Well, I was not the only one that was taken with it. A young man was asked to escort her, and Thomas would leave me at Arsenal. And he did. He took her around all that weekend. We went back to school and got a letter from Paul's mama to say that young man and Miss Dixie, whose name was not very feminine, but it's all right, they had married, and that was T. Roberts. And Miss Dixie, whose name is Pete Hammond, it was then, but of course it's Pete Roberts now. She's back in Thomasville. She has another. She's married again since then. Her son is Fritz Roberts. You know him down the horn.
I'm feeling the connection now.
And so that was a fun romance.
I had no idea the Rose Show was responsible for, or the Rose Festival was responsible for such. Yeah.
Well, the Miss Dixie pageant was actually held on Saturday night, and it was at invitation of area queens, not girls from Thomasville, and it was a judged pageant, and it was a pretty big one as far as Miss Dixie was
I think
concerned.
Ms. Hjort here's gonna share something with us.
I have to add my 2 cents. Paul brought me to Thomasville and married me 68 years ago this month. And that's the only way you can become a real Thomasville. I wanted to share just a few things. This is the city of roses, and this man's family brought it to a glorious ending, but they were hard workers. It takes a lot of work to make a beautiful rose garden, and they knew how. And there were people that had parties there, weddings there, all kinds of things. But the main thing, all of our children had to come home for rose show because they had to help at the garden. And one of them, our oldest son, was loading roses into a bus, and the bus took off, and he had to holler and tell them, stop. I said, they were going to take our son off. People love roses, and they all had to get at least one rose bush. This is an important day in our family, too, because 33 years ago today, our oldest grandson was born, and he was named Sam Hjort because our father was Sam. And he has a birthday on the 27th, and he lives in Texas, and I told him we were still having a parade for him. Then we had, 3 years later, our daughter in Charleston gave us a son, and that was Rose Show Day, but it was on the 22nd. It was also Earth Day, so I can remember his. But I just wanted to share with you that this man is a hard worker, and he still loves roses, and I told him we needed to have roses in our yard. So we have a dozen roses, and he goes out and picks some just about every day. It's the one, and this is our second son. He and our daughter Nancy are the ones that brought us Sam Hjort, whose birthday is today. And they came over to be with us today, and I said, well, we've got to go out to the museum because they're having a rose show, rose festival, rose. Now, to top it off, we're going to have our second great-grandchild, and she is due any moment. And these are the grandparents, they're the first grandchild. And her daughter is going to be named Vivian Rose.
Well, and I want to thank you for coming. I had a number of people, when I asked who should we invite to this panel, I had a number of people mention Paul Hjort. Of course, I didn't know him personally, but I just called you, looked you up and called you, and I really appreciate you guys being part of it because, you know, a number of people mentioned your name, so that was a good choice.
You can't have a discussion on Rose Show.
Now I know.
We have a lot of good stories about roses. We'll tell you sometime.
Thank you very much for coming.
Nancy.
Carl, you need to listen to this. There's a 1951 film about the Rose Show that a garden club member sent me that I enjoyed thoroughly. I didn't know many people in the film, but I knew the ladies. I remember the ladies, Miss Lawson Neal and Miss Nellie, the ones that helped put it on. But Paul, for me, you were the star. Not only was your daddy in it, but there was Paul Hjort walking around. You never saw anybody so tan and musty walking around in that film. So I hope you're enjoying that part of the film.
Very much, and I'll just here, and if I can give anybody a little information, I'll try to, but now I realize I've been out of the business for several years. New roses come along, and I'm not familiar with all that, but I do have some of the old varieties still growing in my own backyard, so I still love to grow roses, and I hope more and more people in Thomasville pick up those good old varieties that grow with minimum care and keep us a city of roses.
Well, your reputation precedes you because I don't think you can get away from the business.
Can you name some of those old ones?
What'd you say?
Name the old ones again.
Name some of the older roses.
Oh, well, I'm thinking about varieties like Mr. Lincoln, Queen Elizabeth. That's a red one first and a pink one. Those are among the best. And if you get either one of those, you got two of the best roses that I ever remember. And since I've grown them all my life, I'd say they're two of the finest. Now there's so many new ones coming on the market every year, and I just really don't know too much about those because I've been out of the business too long. But
thank you. So I want to let everybody know we do have some refreshments that Amelia set up. We're going to go out this way. We want to still mingle outside and chat with everybody, maybe get some photos if the queens are up for that. And we do have some refreshments, and I just want to thank our panelists so much. I mean, I feel like you guys should probably go on.
Thanks. I'll speak for myself. But thank you so much for doing this, and we're just glad to participate.
I think it was a good idea. Let everybody share their memories and not be too formal. So.
And this is something we can repeat with other topics. So if there's another town event or time period or something, going to the Rose Theater or whatever. If something like that, we can get it on the schedule. Just send me your ideas.
The Rose Theater got a great story.
Well, it sounds like that's our next topic.
So we're going to convene out this way. Exit out that way because we've got some folks in the museum anyway. And I want to thank everybody so much for coming. Ruth, Tom, Celia, and Jane.
I got